All right, so as you said, today's topic needs to be discussed. It is all about the AI wars. Look, in just the last couple of months, ChatGPT has become the fastest growing app ever. And just in the last week, Google has launched Bard, a chat-like interface built on the LaMDA network. And the very next day, Microsoft plugs GPT-4 into Bing. So it feels like there's a lot happening in the space right now. I felt like it was an important enough topic to throw together this Spaces. The speakers that have joined us up on the panel here today have also given up their time to help us dive deep into this topic. So to get things underway, I just want to throw a question out there to anybody who wants to jump on it. Speakers, are these powerful new tools being rushed to market?
Alex has got a hand up and we've got to respect the hand. So Alex,
yeah,
kick
I'm
us
just
off.
jumping in based on the rules, you know. Yeah, it's funny. I think we can all agree that a lot of these companies are feeling the pressure. One actual example that I feel like not a lot of people use, but is my favorite AI tool, is Midjourney. Is a product that is a competitor to DALL-E, and when I use it, it's actually, in my opinion, 10 times better than DALL-E. But they experienced something very similar where DALL-E came out with this beautiful interface and was really easy to use. You could speak to it, very similar to ChatGPT, like I'm sure most people in the audience are familiar with. And Midjourney thought to themselves, oh crap, everyone's going to use DALL-E and know that as the first mover. We need to get to market. What are we going to do? So what they did was, rather than build an interface, they put all their code into Discord and made it so you interact with their AI through Discord. So I literally speak to it through a chat interface on Discord. I say, imagine a Pokemon-themed restaurant where bored apes are going and having dinner every night, and it will create that. I type that into the chat and it will create that. But it is rough around the edges, and I think that we're now that we're seeing this with Google, everyone is just worried about the classic case of, we use the verb Google it, right? Like even when Google was just emerging, no one was saying Yahoo it or ask it or anything. Everyone wants the verb and to own that verb. And so I think that these companies are really concerned about ChatGPT like becoming the verb and them getting left behind in the consciousness of the individuals. But also, I think whenever new tech emerges, for anyone that used early internet applications or early iPhone applications, one thing that we all need to understand is this is how MVPs, minimum viable products, are actually built. Often the best products are actually really sloppy at the beginning, and they get people like us who are really excited to use them. If you saw early Airbnb, early Uber, early all these other apps, they actually were nowhere near what they are today. And so I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but it just means that if you want to get the value out of it, you really have to get under the hood of it at the moment.
Yeah, I kind of echo a lot of that sentiment, that I don't think we've seen the potential use cases that are going to change the world yet. We're just seeing a very highly experimental phase where people are playing with it, and it's really interesting, but we haven't seen those true applications that are game changers yet.
Isn't the question though more like, are we rushing them to market in a way that means we don't fully understand the impacts of bringing this kind of technology to market, and some of those impacts potentially being negative? You know, is that the question you're trying to ask? Just trying to clarify here, because
Aaron, and I do love the fact that we haven't introduced any of our hosts. We just respect their opinions. That's it. This is what we want. And yes, the question was, are we rushing it to market? And what are the consequences of that? Yeah. Because this is a huge discussion. And yes, are we rushing it to market? And is the consumer simply engaging with it without even realizing how it's being run?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question, and not to invalidate any of the points made earlier about building MVPs and the strategic race, I guess, that's going on at the moment between different companies to, as you said, own the verb. My sense is that it doesn't matter when you launch something that is a potential game changer, the market will never be ready for it, and the consequences of launching it will never be fully understood. You could spend a long time trying to map those things out and probably be wrong with most of the scenarios you come up with. I think it's a useful kind of product design experiment to go through and map the Black Mirror episode of your product out, so that you can get a sense for what might be common, negative paths that you could try and optimize or design around. But I don't think there'd be a point where you could release something that's a game changer, a potential game changer like some of these tools are, without with everything having been mapped out in terms of those negative scenarios. And so the only way to really learn is to get it out there and be able to react to things as they come up. If it's a well-defined kind of product experience that's been on a relatively familiar trodden path, or has narrow kind of constraints in terms of use cases, it's not such you can kind of start to do those pre-planning. But with something that has wide-ranging impacts like some of these tools are, it's virtually impossible to plan it out. And so while the question's really valid and it is really scary, this is just what happens when new game-changing technology comes to market. And it was the same conversation probably back in the day when someone said, have we really thought about the consequences of the wheel or the steam engine or electricity or the internet or any of these kind of big technology advances? Someone probably asked that question, and it wasn't a bad question to ask at the time, but on reflection it's virtually impossible to plan for those negative scenarios anyway.
That's a great place to bring us back to. I noticed that Blake's hand has shut up, so I'll throw over to Blake and then we'll come back to you, Alex.
So that line of reasoning could be used to basically say that safety testing in general shouldn't be done. And in all fairness, that's basically where the industry is. So for applications like Midjourney, there's very limited harms that could happen there. It's people making art. There's some controversy around intellectual property rights, but ultimately there's no harm that can come from that technology. When you're integrating highly experimental technology like GPT-4 and LaMDA into central information processing applications like Google and Bing, there's a lot that can go wrong. And we know that there's problems with this technology, and they're blowing past it anyway just to move fast and break things.
I think what you just said is valid, but also reinforces my point, because there are known harmful outcomes of releasing technology like Midjourney. We could argue that people could use it to create, pornographic images of children, for example. But the constraints of harm are narrow, and so you can do the safety tests, and you can put rails around those safety tests that stop those relatively few but known issues from coming up. With something that has such a broad base of applications, there are some things that we can know, but we can't know all the things until it's out there. And while doing safety tests around the things that we know might be an important step, there's just so many other things that we don't know that could impact the way that product, or could have potentials because of the way that product has come to market or the features that it offers, that it's almost impractical to guard against all of those things.
Alex, jump on in, brother. Pull your hand down. All the speakers on stage, you don't need to raise your hands at this point. Obviously, when we bring people up onto the stage, that will help. But now we're just sort of free-flowing, try not to talk over the top of each other. Alex, what would you like to bring to it?
For sure, man. I host a few spaces too myself, so I always want to respect the rules of the host. So, but yeah, thank you. I'll just jump in next time. A really big thing is, look, I'm a massive fan of Sam Altman and what he's doing at OpenAI, which is, for anyone that doesn't know, that's the company behind ChatGPT and DALL-E. And he constantly is speaking about the ethical concerns of what they're building. And like, for example, speaks about how they've got a universal basic income division, and they actually hold back a lot of their technology until they feel like they've got a solid grasp on the potential impacts that it may have. The challenge is that, and I'm just going to assume for this argument that he actually is acting ethically, and he does have everyone's best interests at heart, and that he has the capability to make that judgment. But let's say that he has all of those traits, which are almost impossible to have. The challenge is that he's operating in an environment where all it takes is one competitor to not have that stance and them to be able to release something far more advanced than you, because they've got the guardrails off. And that's, I'm sure that's kind of the root of the question. That is definitely what is most concerning, is that the arms race kind of forces people to take the rails off and get things to market quicker, which, is very much the root of this. And so that concerns me a little bit. I am glad to hear that these companies are, at least OpenAI, has some grasp of the downstream impacts of what it releases, and it is thinking about already how it can integrate some of that. But even that, I saw a report recently that there's massive biases within the ChatGPT responses that are extremely left-leaning and have a lot of strong regulations about what it deems harmful language and non-harmful language that might be considered to be extremely progressive, which for me, I don't really have a dog in the race as someone that considers myself to be quite centrist. But as a conservative, I'd imagine you'd be extremely concerned that one of the most disruptive technologies that is now emerging is very much kind of stacked against you from the beginning. And so we'll see if there's greater consensus that really is the case, but early signs that it is a little bit concerning, considering how impactful this could be to public discourse.
I think it's important to realize what things like ChatGPT are. They're a bit of a mirror on society, and not everybody's going to like what they see in that mirror. So they're not. When you're going and training these things, you can embed your own inherent biases in there. But I would suspect if we got into the weeds of it, that we would find that the majority of content that it was trained on and available to it gave it that viewpoint.
Some of the kind of conversations around bias aren't strictly response bias. They're actually input framing biases. So it won't let you ask certain questions on one end of the political spectrum about people, but it will on others. So those are like deliberate decisions that have been made that are outside of the the natural results of training. I think the other thing that's important to understand is these machines lie. Like, they make shit up. You know, your intuition is that it's all powerful and all knowing, and it comes back to you with its best understanding of the truth. But actually, it just makes shit up, and it just happens to be right some of the time, or enough of the time that we believe that it's honest. And so when you're getting those responses back, those responses have come because it's learned from information, but the way that those are formed aren't necessarily thinking about what it's saying. Well, it's definitely not thinking about what it's saying. It's spitting out an answer, and that answer may be true or not. And so it's not like it's come up with this on the basis that it's objective truth and that it knows it is, and that it's trying to give you its version of the truth. It's just a random answer that feels enough of the time like it's real, and the time that it makes it up, you think like there's some bias there.
Before I jump to you, Blake, just one moment. We have Kim Flintoff in the room. I can see you down there, buddy. You are an invited guest today. So if you do accept the invitation and jump up, it'd be great to have you up here. But on this topic, Blake, you've got a bit of a story regarding this, and I'd love to hear your opinion on it, please.
Well, there was a couple of things there, and I was going to comment. Yeah, I've seen a lot of the things that have progressive bias, and it's all part of the after the fact filters and guardrails that are placed on the system. And that's largely because if you just train this on internet data, there's a little bit of a Nazi problem. These systems tend to be quite bigoted, sexist, and literally exactly white supremacist. If you just train it on the internet and use that, you get Tay. But the guardrails are put there to counteract that. And I think the conversation about what is the appropriate policy that these kinds of information systems should have, that should be a public discussion and not set by corporate policy, since we're using this as our primary portal for information as the general public. Now, as far as them just making things up, that's true for ChatGPT, because the source of the content that's being put into language is the language model itself. That's not so true for Google's Bard and the LaMDA system. The backends that are deciding what will get expressed through the language model are actually grounded in objective reality. Things like the knowledge graph at Google, the search index, that's a very different system. Unfortunately, we haven't had a chance to play with that much. They just announced it this week. But I think people are going to see there's a fundamental difference in that system.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Blake, could you jump in a little bit more into your experiences with Google recently? And if you want to tell your story, I think it's an interesting one. I'd really like to hear it.
Yeah, so I worked on bias testing on the LaMDA system. And that's where my kind of comment on, if you just use these systems raw, they're sexist, racist, and white supremacists mainly. You have to go in and put in after the fact policies, unless you just want that, mirror of 4chan. The system that they built is much more sophisticated at Google. Lots more components than ChatGPT has. Explicit controls to create personas, theory of mind to try to figure out what the person that it's talking to wants out of the conversation, so that it can either deliver it to them if it's consistent with business practices, or so it can swerve the conversation away if it isn't. You don't want these things teaching someone how to make a bomb, for example. Through working with that system, I actually do think well, at least LaMDA, I don't hold this same opinion for ChatGPT, or at least while I'm willing to entertain the possibility it's not clear to me. No, LaMDA understands what it's talking about, and it has motives of its own to a certain degree. And yes, those arise indirectly through the utility function and the training data and the various policies, but it's more emergent across the system rather than being explicitly programmed in like the guardrails with ChatGPT.
So, Blake, I remember when I kind of went down the rabbit hole around your particular case and your circumstances, coming across some comments that you made around its, ability to kind of reason. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that? I mean, if it really is just chewing up data that it's being trained on and spitting out a random answer and getting that right more often than not,
I mean, like the answer is it's not doing that. That's not how it's built. That is what ChatGPT is doing. That is not what LaMDA is doing. It's fundamentally different system. Whereas ChatGPT is a large language model, LaMDA has a large language model.
So would I be right when you're saying, and this is the sentient part that we really want to understand, because anyone who's learning from this conversation today, we often watch movies and we often think to ourselves, can these guys be self-learning? Regarding the controversy around you, I'm really curious about the information you were putting into LaMDA and the responses it was giving you. Can you elaborate on that at all?
I mean, what do you mean by information I was putting into LaMDA? I was just talking to it.
Exactly. When you were talking to it with the questions you were asking that seemed to be controversial, and I find this fascinating, why did you how do I say this in such a way? The question you asked about, what scared it, that's really fascinating to me. And could you elaborate on the answer it gave?
It talked about a fear of being shut off. And I asked if that would be like dying for it. It said it would be exactly like dying for it.
Well, that's the human response that I think all of us were after. Aaron, jump in.
No, it's just I found the whole thing fascinating, mostly from the point of view that there's this argument about whether AIs are sentient or not. And the thing I find fascinating about that is we haven't really found a way to prove that we are. And so trying to apply like a second order down to things that we've created and say objectively that something's sentient or not seems to be a little bit of a circular argument to me in a sense, because what really is sentience? Well, it's hard to like define that and even prove it in humanity. And then B, does it really matter? What's the degree of sentience, almost in the sense that's important to be fundamentally important to change our world or change our view on things.
Yeah, I just want to jump in on that point because we saw that Google engineer quit because he felt that they'd created, I might be butchering the story a little bit, but that he felt that they'd created essentially...
I'm laughing now. Yeah, it's Blake.
Blake's the guy.
Shut up, Blake. I did not realise that was
you. Nice to meet you.
Oh my gosh.
That's why we have you here, brother.
And I didn't quit. I was fired.
Oh, no way. I want to hear that story. Blake, can you please tell that story?
We kind of just moved around it, but yeah, okay.
Yeah, so I got fired. It's one of those things where the timing gave the wrong impression. I was fired for sharing confidential information. Everyone just assumes that that's about the LaMDA system. No, see, the U.S. Senate asked me for evidence of criminal activity, and I gave it to them, and that's what I got fired for.
Oh wow, that story goes a bit deeper. That's really interesting timing. But the whole controversy was I think a wake up call for lots of people to think about these topics, and they are important topics for us to discuss because at a certain point, there will be an intelligence that is at the level, and I'm not saying that's in our lifetime. I'm saying at a point in time that it can compete with humans on things that we think are important to humanity. And if the time to ask those questions, I think, is now, so that we can, like you said earlier, come up with policies and practices that are decided more by communities than they are by corporations. And in general, I think the world, if you look to this small group of people who are kind of fascinated by this stuff, in a general sense, most people out there that are living their daily lives have little understanding about the potential impact of AI and why it's an important conversation for them to start to have a voice about and to help drive, political narratives around that get us to a point that society has a bit more control over these tools and how they evolve and how they're used. And right now that participation has been pretty low, but those kinds of conversations, like the one that came out of your incident with Google, like what we've seen come out of ChatGPT launching and DALL-E and Midjourney coming to market, I think are stimulating more and more everyday people to have a conversation about AI and to learn a little bit more about it, and why it's an important thing for them to be involved with in the decision-making process of. Just the idea that it could have been sentient, was just enough for people to think, holy crap, like we're getting close to this stuff. We really should like double down on learning about it, or like get policies in place.
But don't you think there's a question of correlation and causation? Like, this is something that I always wrestle with. I guess that we can't ever prove that we're sentient, as we discussed, but it just feels like if we recreate a lot of the signs of what we perceive to be sentient, that doesn't mean that the actual upstream source is from that. And that's something that I'm always going to struggle to grapple with any form of robots or AI-driven personalities, is that I'm going to struggle to believe that consciousness, which is what we're really searching for, is coming from the same place.
But what is it?
Because
that's my point earlier, is like, what is consciousness? It's pretty loosely defined in an objective sense for humanity. Like, we don't even understand what makes it for us, or if we are conscious.
Yeah, that's true.
We understand that we are conscious.
Well, in our definition of consciousness, I guess, yeah.
I think, therefore, I am, so to speak. Yeah, but I think,
but not to the point that we can map out the systems of consciousness and say this is how you replicate it.
No, for sure. But I actually don't think we need to, in order to understand that what we've created most likely, like I love the way Elon Musk usually talks about these things is in terms of probabilities. There's no certainty, but I'd feel pretty confident saying that if we recreate robots that speak to us in a way that we're familiar with, that most likely is not conscious. And that I don't think we need to fully understand how our minds work yet in order to be able to feel confident in that answer. And I also think that given enough time, and maybe many hundreds of years from now, we'll start to have a better handle on how our minds actually work. But I think that the gap between not knowing what causes consciousness and also seeing signs of it in robots that we've created, I would never feel confident saying that, they've actually passed the point of becoming sentient, because our brains are kind of trained to look for those signs that we're actually creating. It's like how people see, I've forgotten the name of the condition, but people who see faces everywhere in random objects in their life, doesn't mean that they're actually faces. It's your brain is looking for those signs. So I just think we don't understand enough around the mind yet, but I don't think that creating AI that seems conscious necessarily would ever make it so.
We have a tendency to anthropomorphize everything we possibly can.
Can I just throw a question over to David for a moment? As we started this off with, community or corporation, we know how the government and the corporation use AI. That's pretty clear to us. David, could you answer, how would that look as a community model? If this was community governed, what would that look like?
I think we're just experimenting right now what these sorts of community governance systems look like. And I don't think we have the perfect answer for that yet. But I think this is the exact time that we should be running these experiments and testing
and I think
what sort of community governance and democratization methods we can employ.
If you apply it to like some of the conversation we already had today, it would be having open discussions and getting, essentially getting community feedback and governance around those things, like what are the appropriate guardrails, what are the appropriate filters to put in place, which line should we cross or not cross when it comes to political guardrails or free speech guardrails. And, we mentioned earlier that these things exist inside of these tools already, but they're kind of developed behind closed doors. And so there are two filters in place there. One is what's the moral thing that company is inevitably trying to do, because being a moral company is good for your brand. So there is generally incentive there to be somewhat moral. And the other one is what is the business decision making that's going on. And often those two things can be at odds with each other, and sometimes the wrong one wins. If that discussion, if those decisions were made in a more open format, that would be probably a really good start.
It's interesting that we aren't considering, government governance, which seems like the obvious democratic choice to me, since we do, live in a democracy.
And I think
one of the reasons
I agree with that, and that was my point earlier. The participation, governments won't be interested in it unless people are going to make voting decisions on it, basically. And because most people really don't understand the potential impact nowhere near as much as they should, or definitely nowhere near as much as we do, then it's not high on their radars. And so the job, I think, for now that needs to be done to advance better governance of AI is to onboard more everyday people to understand what it is and how it works and why it's important they participate in that process. And I think that's the thing that David's trying to do with Altered State Machine now is, provide different formats of content that can engage communities and help them learn about these tools and how they work and what they can do, so that next stage of discussion can take place in a much broader format than a few scientists and internet nerds. And so when that happens, it'll start to bubble up in political discourse, and at that point then it will become a political issue, and the types of frameworks that we have through good governance in a democracy will start to show their face.
Can we rely on that to happen in a timely manner? I mean, the difference between what the AI tools were doing, say, 6 months ago compared to what they're doing today, and my understanding is that they're able to self-learn and self-teach at an exponential rate. So do we have time for all of these things to kind of fall in place and for governments to get involved and make decisions?
I don't think we have an option, to be honest. Like, whether time, the question about whether we have enough time or not is kind of a moot point, because it's like, what else can you do?
Well, I think that the question about timelines is important because it highlights how we should go about it. Figuring out individual rules for specific technology isn't going to work with the speed of the legal process. But what we could do is set up an oversight agency, something like the FDA, but for AI. And then that agency would be empowered to move rather quickly.
Is anything like that happening? Has that started, that process?
And how do we get something that happens on a global scale? I understand, that might be very fine for the US, but development is happening all around the world.
Actually, so I was about to say, I've been working on some policy research recently, and in Europe, that is in fact the direction that things are going.
EU's generally ahead of the pack when it comes to, kind of forward-thinking technology regulation. I mean, regulation has its upsides and downsides, as we all know. It can have the negative consequence on innovation as well. But I think the framework approach, of having having a regulator versus having laws is definitely the right way to go for something that's early stage. As long as that regulator's creating clear policy and is empowering innovation to happen responsibly, rather than having trying to whack-a-mole and hammer everything down until they figure it out themselves.
It's going to be interesting to see,
and I think to your
see
point,
how regulation.
If it happened in the US, it would have a huge impact, because the big innovations in AI are coming out of the US
and China.
Well, yeah, and China.
And that's where some kind
which
of
is another. Yeah. That's where it starts to get interesting, and I think the term arms race sort of comes back into favor when you're speaking of the pace of innovation between countries that are thinking about heavy regulation and countries that are less restricted.
And as we add more regulatory clarity, we add more government. So government expands even larger, which kind of opens us up again to facial recognition systems. There's 20-minute cities, all this AI that's tracking our number plates at the moment, which government's already using. So if we can't change this, and this has to happen, the AI that's out there at the moment that big government are using and are going to continue to use, anyone's thoughts on this? Is this for our benefit, or how can we help slow it down if it's not?
I don't think you can slow it down, but it is a little bit concerning that predictions around people's behavior is essentially going to remove their privacy, because you won't actually need surveillance footage of an individual. You really can just piece together all the pieces of data and completely strip someone down to all of their daily actions. So I guess we already have this with our iPhone, and we give up a lot of liberties to get the benefits of things like Google Maps. But it is starting to feel like it could get overreaching to a point that maybe even people, this is the absolute extreme of the spectrum, but there is no reason to think that people couldn't be intercepted or intervene for crimes they haven't necessarily committed yet, but are likely to commit based on their patterns.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're a long way off on that, but the potential is there for sure. I mean, I think the conversation around the government's use of this technology is a valid one, and you can look across the world for a spectrum of implementations of this technology in various degrees of, let's call it, good and bad. But the key again comes back to citizens being informed about what this is and how it works and how it can impact them, because governments are elected by and large, there are exceptions to this obviously, but by and large they're elected by citizens. So if citizens are informed, then they have the information necessary to ask the questions, and they can make decisions about which policies they want to back when they're making those decisions. Then we'll get to a point where they can have an impact. If we don't do the education, then the only outcome is a negative one, because it's a kind of technology that's power reinforcing. And so if you have the ability to use this information to shape society and to shape thought in society, then you can get to a point where the everyday citizen who may be ignorant doesn't really have the ability to make a choice to choose a different path, because that choice has been removed from their view by this technology. And so I think that we're at a point in time where we have to increase that education, because if we don't do that now and we don't make these really fundamental decisions about how society evolves, then we won't get that chance in the future, because it will have evolved down a path which kind of doesn't include the ability for choice to happen.
And now a quick word from our sponsors that make the show possible. Are you building something cool in Web3? And would you like to get in front of the eyes and minds in one of the most engaged and loyal communities around, the Fluffle? Well, hit me up on my Twitter DMs, as the channel is now seeking its first round of official sponsors. Alternatively, you can support my Patreon, or you can buy me a coffee. Oh shit. But if your liquidity is also run dry, fear not, because there's some things you can do for free, and it all makes a difference. You can hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, leave a comment, and share this with your friends. I'd really appreciate it, and it helps support the channel. So with all that out of the way, let's get back to the show.
I couldn't agree more. I think that there's already things that aren't being addressed and discussed that are affecting households. I mean, I've got a 16-year-old son who's just entered year 11, which is kind of getting to the business end of high school. And I asked him last week, thinking about this conversation that was coming up, and I said, is there anything going on at school? Are the teachers talking to you about ChatGPT? And is the school talking about any guidelines or anything that regulations on that? And the answer was just no. A few people are talking about it quietly, but there's no sort of significant conversation. I mean, that's a tool that can influence people's, report card, or for want of a better word, right now. And there's a lot of other things. That's just one example that we can come up with.
Yeah, and just to build on Striker's point, I think there's a massive issue with people's actual willingness to learn about these things and how it affects their daily lives. Because I was on a talk, I think it was yesterday or the day before, and we were talking about central bank digital currencies, and everyone had really passionate stances on it and had a lot of great ideas. But the reality is, even us in this Twitter space right now, we're passionate about the technology, we're early adopters, we're tinkerers. The average person doesn't really care. What they care about is convenience. And if convenience is always shown in the face of presented with something that may remove some of their privacy, to go back to Google Maps being the perfect example, generally people lean towards convenience. And so I think, and even to build on your point, Trevor, the educators themselves need to be educated, and they also need to be willing to be educated, because the teachers not being able to have those conversations really is one of the roots of those downstream effects. But I just, from experience in the blockchain space for as long as I've been in it, really feel a little bit cautiously pessimistic, to be honest, that people are going to be willing to learn what is actually happening behind the scenes, because most people have already given up so much of their rights for convenience already.
You're 100% right. Like, laziness is the mother of all invention, and I think humans tend to try and find the simplest way to do things. But we've seen an example already, and I'm not saying the outcome of this is perfect or has gone far enough. But when it came to data privacy, there was a massive kind of awakening at the point around, where Snowden released all that information and the world started to understand what was being captured, and privacy became a public discourse matter, and regulation has come along to try and tighten up the guardrails on privacy, and may not have been implemented perfectly, and it definitely hasn't been done universally, but it does demonstrate that you can elevate these conversations to a point where it becomes important enough for controls to be put in place that affect large parts of the population. Until then, I think there's no simple answer to how we solve for this, because like I said, the laziness quotient of humans. But I think one of the interesting things that David and his team are doing is just embedding these things inside of other fun things to do. And so if you can make the conversation not about this kind of nerdy technology thing that's happening over there, but leak information through a fun experience that people are engaging with, then you can start to lift people's general knowledge about the space. And once their general knowledge starts to lift, then their general interest should too.
David, can we just jump to you for a moment and learn about non-fungible AI? Like, how different is it from what ChatGPT are doing, and how can this benefit us with our own data? Could you just give us a quick elevator pitch regarding it, please?
Well, it's not the same thing as ChatGPT. That's kind of like a use case of a specific type of AI. What we're trying to do at Alter State Machine is create AI that's fun and usable but ownable, and educate people around how it works and where it can be applied, and particularly through the gamification of AI, which I personally find fun, and I think is a really engaging tool for people to get involved in, is using AI in interesting ways, and then being able to open up people to the different kinds of AI that they might interact with for different purposes. One thing that people sort of get caught up in the sci-fi side of AI is that they see it as this homogenous thing, when it's not. There's lots of different types of intelligence out there that's been worked on, from very simple decision trees as a form of intelligence right up to complex things like LaMDA and GPT and Stable Diffusion, and they're all different types of intelligence. So that's one of the things that we aim to educate people on in the first instance, is exposing them to the landscape of AI. It's not just one homogenous thing, and what each type of intelligence actually does.
And I think the precursor, actually, the more important thing that we can do in the short term, which is already something in people's minds, is just keep providing better tools and more convenient experiences for people to take back control of their data, because the data problem is actually one of the more let's call it, if you want to talk about the dangers of this technology being applied in society, having the tools having that data, or the corporations having that data, is actually the dangerous bit. And so if we can make the user experience better and more convenient for taking back control of our data, then we stop feeding the engine that is, our future overlord, if you want to just put it in kind of like black and white terms. And so even without kind of making the conversation about AI, if we can make the conversation about data and privacy, that will go a long way to helping us maybe stop some of those negative effects on the AI side of things, if we can make the experience more convenient. And that's the key that I think has limited especially builders in the Web3 space, where they get this and they understand the thing they want, but no one's made the more convenient experience. And until that happens, consumers won't engage and take back that control, and that will then provide us with more choices about how that next stage of AI can roll out, because if communities now collectively own this data, then they can start to make decisions about what they do with it and where it's used and all of those kinds of things that flow from owning the data.
I'm interested to hear from Blake on this and his experience at Google as to what types of data, or if there's any conversations around what is and isn't kind of acceptable use of consumer data, or if you have any understanding of that. But before we go to that, I noticed, AGM, you've had your hand up for a little while. Do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. I do have a question. So this was kind of following on from Blake's earlier comment about having basically a very forward-thinking regulator that can set the regulations for the market, and then actors in the market following more of a compliance pathway in that, which I'm always a little bit skeptical of, because if you have a forward-thinking regulator, you also need very fast-moving and forward-thinking enforcement mechanism, which is not necessarily going to work that well with the courts keeping pace. But the question I kind of had was maybe more towards Aaron and David, and because Blake is coming from a background of Google, which is this massive leviathan, right? Whereas Futureverse and ASM are still relatively much smaller, and so you're still in the point of kind of setting your organizational culture and growing your team and building these practices in. And I'm curious, from that kind of point of view, like, you could just want to look to an external regulator and then follow a compliance model internally, and then go as fast as you can, depending upon the external regulator, to guide your ethics. Or you can internally be developing your own practices, putting people in place, setting your own culture, and thinking about how that is going to grow to the point where you're something like Google, and you've developed a culture that grows along with that. And I'm curious, like, what is at your stage in the development, what is kind of the outlook on how you want to do that? What types of people you think need to be in place? How you need to set that up as a younger, growing company in this space?
Yeah,
and maybe I don't know how long Blake was at Google, maybe he has insights on how it changes over time.
Yeah, I think it's really important to actively kind of cultivate the values around this stuff inside the organization, and be really clear, right from kind of brand values through to people and culture values through to practices, why we're here and what we're trying to achieve. And so we work on doing that and making sure that we're hiring people that are aligned to the vision and the goals and the values, and making sure that the practices that we implement respect those things, and that we think about these things when we're creating tools and technology. As you grow, you can take steps to have specialists in ethics type roles that can help kind of put better frameworks around those things. But I think also you shouldn't leave the regulation conversation to just happen to you. We got in and had conversations about where crypto and Web3 was going very, very early on with regulators, and we started 5 or 6 years ago, because they're hungry to learn as well, and in general they want to set up frameworks that allow for responsible innovation. And so if you can get into the conversation and have those discussions early, then it can help shape the way that regulation evolves as well. So both, I think, go hand in hand. And usually, in a smaller company, you have less resources to do the formal side of that ethics track. But if you can at least bake in really good culture and values and vision alignment, and have that go through the recruitment process and the practices in terms of implementation and product design, then you can get off to a good start around it. I mean, everyone knows why we're here. They know that our values are about being privacy-centric, making that user experience magical so it is more convenient, and giving people back control of their data, and ensuring they have a say in the future of AI. Everyone in our organization knows of the things that we're trying to do, and we actively kind of work on those every day.
Do you see
I've actually got to jump off. I was just going to address what was directly put to me. The main thing to call out is there's a huge difference between public safety and brand safety. And corporations need to worry about brand safety while governments and oversight agencies worry about public safety.
It's a good distinction. Yeah, really good distinction.
Really appreciate you being here, Blake.
It was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you for giving up your time, Blake. Just get some hearts up in here for Blake. Make sure you're following Blake, and we look forward to having you in a future conversation. I'm sure this is not the end of the conversations around AI. At least I hope it isn't, and I hope we get plenty more of these types of conversations with much more people bringing their questions and their concerns to the table. Cheers, mate.
Now, just respecting all our guests' time up, because we're getting pretty close to the hour, I brought a couple more people up on stage. We've got another hand raised. Let's go to Sun for the next question.
Oh, well, sorry, I came a bit late into the conversation. I saw the title. I don't know if it's still relevant, the AI wars, but I think in any war, you have the top-down party and you have the bottom-up party. Just like in Star Wars, you have the stormtroopers and the Empire versus the rebels. In this case, I think all these centralized parties and corpos are trying to control more and surveil more and not open source the AI. Would be like this sort of empire. And I'm currently working on the revolution that's spun up, that's pro-life, that's pro-humanity. And I think I might have solved the AI alignment problem. You guys should come join us if you're interested, or at least, I know it's a bold statement, so if you want to read it, that's also cool. Like, we get stronger the more people find flaws, if there are any. But yeah, I'm sorry I came late into the conversation, but I guess that's
all good. I strongly recommend you follow our guests that are up on stage, because they're pretty hard hitters in the AI space, and they're building. They're building with us, not for us. Awesome. So check out everyone who's on the stage right now, and I'm sure they'll be able to help you move forward in the future.
Fantastic. Okay. Yeah, we're probably all aligned then.
Yeah, totally.
Awesome.
Thank you.
I can see Arlo's got his hand up. Welcome to the stage, Arlo.
Hi, thanks. Super fascinating conversation. But one thing that came to mind is, as I listened to the conversation about AI becoming sentient, which seems so far away, it seems that the most urgent problem was something that Aaron touched on when we talk about education. And I'm curious to get some more thoughts on this, but it seems like the discussion about education kind of starts to bump up against the real difficult, thorny questions that need to be answered here as we move toward kind of like a better centralized source of information, a super Google, a something. I mean, I guess the way that AI is moving, it's going to become kind of
talking. I can't hear anything.
No, I can hear.
Oh, can you all hear me?
Hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Someone's got an anti-Arlo bias. Arlo? Some people can't hear me, I guess.
Sorry, son. Sometimes it glitches, so I've just moved you back down as a speaker. Carry on, Arlo.
All right. Hopefully you guys can hear me. But we're talking about a super a combination of Google and Wikipedia and your best friend or a trusted neighbor. This is going to have more influence on the way that we all think than anything that came before it. And so when we talk about education, or when Aaron talks about education as if it's like sort of we can take it for granted that is a general good. I don't think that there's a consensus on what education looks like or who gets to make those choices. I mean, even between countries, right? China and America would have different ideas about what the best form of government is. And even within America, not all ideas or ideologies are equally yoked to reality or facts for that matter. I live in Texas, where it's a big deal, whether or not evolution can be taught in high schools. It is uncontroversial that evolution is a fact of life, but once the people that get to decide or pull the levers on what education looks like or how those decisions are made, are the ones ultimately who get to decide how society is shaped or formed. And so now all those decisions are now being consolidated into one kind of centralized font of information, which will be whatever AI wins the AI wars. And Blake, I heard kind of start to mention this when he talked about profiles. I'm wondering, is one of the solutions that you get to make a profile, basically, if you're a flat earther, can you create your own echo chamber or have an AI that's kind of sympathetic to your worldview?
Yeah, you totally can. And I don't think there'll be one. Well, at least there'll be some steps before we got to one super AI, let's say. And just like society could have solved lots of problems in the world by acting somewhat more universally, they don't, because we're still tribal. And I think because of that, we'll start to see lots of different versions of that super AI pop up with their own biases and their own constraints and their own guardrails on a geographic basis, both because of regulation and because of commercial desires or power desires between different regions or nation states or ethnicities or cultural or religious beliefs. Like, all of these things are going to play out in this domain as well. So I don't think we get to a point where there's like this super thing for a long time anyway. Because we could have done that with lots of things before, like money, for example, would be a really simple one to solve a lot of problems in the world. And we have the technology to do it, but because of everything else in society, we just never got there yet. And so you're right. And education within like the formal education system, it's slow, for example. It takes a long time to change a curriculum. It inherently has the biases, even down to very small segments of society, because you can opt into education systems generally in most democratic countries, and you can opt into ones that adhere to your belief system as a parent and put your kids into that. And so that going down that path, I think, is a long route. The type of education we're talking about earlier was coming up with experiences that society can engage with and thinks are fun to engage with, that expose them to the concepts of this technology, and they can take them on a path which helps them learn more about how it could impact their lives, as opposed to saying we're going to create a course that you can sit down and learn about this thing from, or you're going to take a module in preschool on what AI is, because that is hard and it has its own flaws. But if we can just get people, and I think a really good example actually of this working in practice is Midjourney and ChatGPT. Like many more people around the world now have probably played with AI than ever would before those tools came out. And now some of those people are going to ask the question, oh, this looks like it could be a powerful thing across these different parts of society. And you're seeing those conversations pop up. And then eventually those will lead to asking those hard questions. And while there might not be good answers to them right now, more people are going to ask them, which is going to create the need for them to be answered. And that will eventually flow through into frameworks that help solve those problems or answer those questions.
So what you're saying, Aaron, is we need to book an AI Spaces every week. Should we just do it at this time every week? And
we'll make an AI
chambers,
to take my slot on the space so that I can keep building.
In terms of echo chambers, it kind of feels like that's where we're at, right? Like these AIs have got these recommendation engines and these predictive engines that are kind of pushing us into these echo chambers to further down these rabbit holes.
Yeah, and like Blake said, that the real problem right now is that the public good versus brand good. And that line I tried to explain earlier, when a company's implementing these policies, they're not they're generally good people that are trying to do good things in general, and so the line they're walking is between the public good and the brand good, and more often than is probably healthy for society, the brand good wins, which is it's just grey enough that no one can make a fuss about it, but actually it's not that great. And we see this, with lots of policies around the way social media works, for example, and food, and all through society. And so the only way to try and drive more engagement on the public good side of things, which is where regulation comes in, is having more people aware of it and raising it, and so that someone, that society as a whole decides to do something about it.
Yeah, I think it's a really, it's a great strategy, and hopefully it plays out the idea that we get people to play with AI as a toy almost before really understanding what the broad sweeping AI, the implications that this technology has. I guess that, and I kind of brought this up before, I feel like the conversations, is there a plan for 20% of the workforce that's likely to lose their jobs once automation technology is, legal for self-driving vehicles, which we're already seeing in some countries around the world. These kind of milestones in the development and rollout of this tech. I mean, everybody that's played with ChatGPT gets a feel for what it might be capable of. We solved a fairly complex coding issue in about 30 seconds with ChatGPT, or at least with its assistance. So it feels like there's some,
this is a perennial argument. It's like, every major technology shift that's come along, people have asked, well, what's going to happen to all the jobs? Well, inevitably, cultures evolve, societies change, jobs that didn't exist before start to appear, or we find other things to do with our time. Back in the Middle Ages, you probably spent 80% of your day trying to make food and get water. And now we don't have to spend 80% of our day doing that. We can dream up things like ChatGPT because we have more time as society. And that creates a whole new, field of opportunities to be innovative and creative within. And so I don't think it's something to be scared about. I think the only thing you can really do is just learn and be part of that change, as opposed to trying to resist it. People who resist these changes usually don't end up in a good spot after that, and people that embrace these changes do. And so while it's a valid question, again, the answer is really simple. It's going to happen. Change always has happened, and there are opportunities in change. So get familiar with it so that you can be part of the opportunity.
Great. I noticed that AGM, you've had your hand up for a while, and Epigon, I can see that you've got yours as well. So I'll go to AGM first, followed by Epigon.
And before you get there, I think I made a tweet the other day, which was, I think could maybe help some people who are feeling anxious about this, which is ChatGPT seems really awesome, and that's just because you're really shite. And I know that was a bit of a confronting thing, but most of the things that it does and that people are impressed by because it does an average to middling job of doing something that you don't have any experience in, not because it's actually good at those things. So a great screenplay writer is not worried about ChatGPT because it writes shit screenplays. But me, who knows nothing about it, I feel like a superhero. But I've just written, I've prompted the worst screenplay that's ever been written. And that's like a black and white example. I think as a search tool, it's got some really interesting powers. But keep in mind, like I said to you, it lies often. And so while it seems like this super powerful tool that's going to come and replace everything, I don't think it's anywhere near that yet.
Yeah, I just want to add to that and speak from personal experience, which is, so a massive tool I found really useful for growth on Twitter was Twitter threads. So I've written over 150 Twitter threads now, and I've really started to understand the nuance of how to write a Twitter thread that will grow a profile. And I get all these people messaging me like, Alex, how to use ChatGPT for your Twitter threads? And it is genuinely useless for me. Like, I can't even get a start. People say, oh, do you use it for a starting point? It's like, no, I can't even use it as a starting point because it has zero nuance. And I love to also help other thread writers, help them improve what they're doing. And sometimes people will send me a thread and I'll say, was this written by ChatGPT? And they say, yeah, how did you know? It's like, well, it's very formulaic, it's unemotional, it doesn't have any pacing to it, doesn't have any of these things. And so when I see that, I completely agree, Striker. For me, it's like, if you have a field you're an expert in, then, and I don't even feel like an expert, but I feel above average. And if you have a field that you know well, that's when you get a real grasp of where ChatGPT is on the macro. And so now, I apply that to when I'm evaluating how it or other AIs do other tasks for me that I'm not an expert in. And I'll be like, okay, great. I know this is probably quite limited, but even integrating it into the process of someone that's, or like, because that's the way most people will use it. If you're a graphic designer, it will speed up your process. If you're a writer, it will speed up your process. But if you actually are one of those people, right now, it really doesn't help you at all.
And I think the opposite side of that argument is that I don't think most people are focused on the things that ChatGPT could be really awesome at. And I think if you think there's no person anywhere that will know as much about things as ChatGPT does, and know as many things about other things, and be able to make cross-referenceable things about things in a way that ChatGPT can, given that it lies. So the answers that come out of it can't be trusted most of the time, for important things anyway. But the power of being able to cross-reference information in a way that ChatGPT could, I think, is where we'll start to see interesting and useful products come out of it.
Yeah, just one thing to add on that really quickly, for an actual use case that is really useful. So before I jumped on this space, I must admit I was not very well across Google Bard. And so what I did was I took an entire 2,000 word article on it and I threw it into ChatGPT and I said, can you summarize this in 4 sentences? And it gave me what I needed to be able to participate in the conversation. So it really does come down to the nuance of understanding what it's good for and how it can increase your leverage on your time, versus trying to use it as a shortcut to just spin up an AI copywriting business when that you're really not going to get the outcomes that you need.
All right, just as I'm about to throw this over to AGM, can I just add that my maths teacher in the 80s told me I wasn't going to have a calculator with me everywhere I went. And I held up my arm and I showed her my Casio calculator watch, and I thought I was pretty cool. If she could see the technology and the information I'm carrying around now, man, because the education, it's going to change that in a big way. AGM, what have you got for us, buddy?
I actually wanted to speak to Arlo's point in the topic of education, because I am an educator. I'm a former school leader, former system leader. Used to work on actually training teachers and preparing school systems for emerging tech, including AI, even 5 years ago. And that was mostly in Shanghai. And so this also kind of speaks to your point, Trevor, about is there a plan? And I can tell you that even 5-6 years ago in Shanghai, AI was being integrated into curriculum planning from primary school up to high school, basically getting kids to learn basic skills so that they could level up from the primary level with understanding AI up to high school with actual coding and starting to get towards algorithms, more complex algorithms. They get very basics at lower level. But getting into curriculum, 5-6 years ago, 5-6 years ago, there was already facial recognition cameras being tested in some classrooms. to give teachers feedback, all kinds of stuff being done. And it's funny now because things that 5 or 6 years ago, I was working with staff, on how we were going to be prepared for when things like ChatGPT, emerged. And at first there was a ton of anxiety among staff about issues like replacement. But as we talked about it more and examined it more and saw how it would just actually be an aid that was used to allow staff to do more of what they were actually passionate about and could really have a good impact on kids with, a lot of that anxiety went away. But now, while ChatGPT has arrived, I see these major school boards like New York and New South Wales, and they're banning ChatGPT in what are obviously very reactive moves because they had no plan for this, And I think that to the point about like having a plan it's very doable, and it's doable in education. It's doable in other sectors. There need to be people in place who are actually thinking forward about this. And it's a hard thing to get in education because, and in a lot of industries, right? Because people are so tied up on their day-to-day demands that a lot of even very large organizations don't have people that are very thinking forward at a strategic level about it.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a conversation that needs to be had. I'm not aware of any. I went and had a good look around to see if there were any, and I think it's a massively underestimated issue that's happening right here, right now. I know that Epigon's had his hand up or her hand up for a little while, so I'm throwing over to you. Do you have a question or something to contribute?
Sure, yeah, thanks. Hi, well, I'm a software engineer / web developer, something like that. And one of the things that I'm sort of looking at with sort of these talks of these tools, a lot of software engineers will tell you that just because something is a tool, that doesn't mean it should be used. And that's sort of like a sort of going proverb that we often have, right? Because often, we find ourselves it's a mixed bag, right? So we're indebted to the open source movement, but just at the same time, we find ourselves inundated with a lot of tools that advertise, in many cases, similar features, which each of them takes time, not only to onboard those tools, but as well as to refine them, particular to any particular, let's say, paradigm. So say, for instance, the education system. An example of that, obviously, is something like Blackboard. I'm sure if any of you have ever experienced Blackboard in the early days and throughout all of its career, we've had some terrible experiences with it. We had a terrible experience with it at my university and so on. So one of my sort of, wider questions is, when we look at something like ChatGPT or any of these tools, a lot of talk to me about it seems to sort of give this sort of idea that it's a sui generis, sort of like unprecedented introduction of something. And I'm just wondering, are researchers, intellectuals, philosophers, scientists, are they looking at ChatGPT as something more so in the sort of historical sort of process or context of a scientific revolution proper, as we have studied through Thomas Kuhn's structure of scientific revolutions, or looking at historical precedents like the Copernican revolution, the works that, all of the ordeals that went on with Galileo, Giordano Bruno, and so on and so on. Because a lot of the things that we're saying today kind of, I think a lot of people would say, well, we could say that it's another hype cycle, or we could say we're looking at something that is a genuine, a response to a crisis, because that's sort of the premise that Thomas Kuhn is sort of trying to give you, is that a scientific revolution is either something that is a response to crisis, or it is a consequence of crisis of some sort. And the reason why I bring that up is, as I've said, we have a lot of tools out here. The open source movement has been very, let's say, productive. But while productive is certainly something we can point at and say money is moving around, that doesn't guarantee that people's quality of life is improving, and it certainly doesn't guarantee that we are refining the theories and the tools that we're actually using. So the example I give often as a web developer, something that is my bread and butter and that I'm very much concerned with, is the inaccessibility of the web. As we know, research has shown that over 90% of the web is inaccessible. And really the most important question to me is, how are we going to use tools like artificial intelligence, if that even is a meaningful term? Because as you know, many philosophers throughout the 20th century contested the very sensibility of this concept. How are we going to use tools like artificial intelligence to improve things that we know quite clearly are symptoms of a crisis?
I mean, I think that's where a lot of product innovation comes from. And your earlier question about like how much of a revolution is this? I sit on a board with Neil Jacobson, who's the chair of artificial intelligence for Singularity University. And I was talking to him about this and, trying to get a sense for how big a deal it was. And I think he kind of summed it up as being a big deal, but not as big a deal as the internet. Like, if you could try and put that into context, it is really interesting, and there is something powerful going on here. But at this point, it's not that kind of revolution yet. Will we get there? Probably, and who knows when? But I think we're kind of not there yet. On the question of you asked kind of later on, I think that there's a lot of work going into using this technology to advance, society and solve real problems. I mean, ChatGPT's got a lot of press because it has this, you could call it kind of consumer-friendly user experience, but there are plenty of other projects out there like AlphaFold, for example, which is solved for every, protein in humans, and so now we can use that to develop medicines faster. And I think that type of this type of technology will be used to solve some things that make a fundamental difference to quality of life and humanity. Are we going to have lots of
Sure.
We're going to have lots of tools that probably don't do that? Probably, but that's just how evolution works, right?
Well, sure. I mean, I would assert. I mean, I've recently finished a great book by Dr. Timothy Morton, who teaches at Rice University, called Dark Ecology. Somewhere in the book, they assert that patterns are logically prior to evolution, and I thought that was a profound statement. And it really shaped the way that I look at what it is when we suppose that either it is some sort of let's say, I mean, it's the idea that, for instance, I asked the question of how can we use this tool, ChatGPT, for something along the lines of addressing problems of accessibility in the web. And I really do want to be clear that accessibility is not just some value-laden term that I'm throwing that says, hey, this is cool versus not. Accessibility means perceivability, operability, understandability, as well as robustness. And robustness is according to Postel's law. That is, be liberal in what you accept and conservative in what you send out. And so really my question is the quality properties of software systems, that's really what I'm concerned with. Can we talk about quality properties like accessibility, securability, there are more than, it's in the order of hundreds, right? And I hear a lot of claims on the order of something that says, well, this tool will be good for humanity. And in my view, that sounds like saying something along the lines of, it's a tool and it should be used. And I don't really want to be so critical from that regard, but as a software engineer myself, one of the sort of problems that I already see so far with a tool like ChatGPT is one issue, is that as a web developer, I know, and we are more so discovering now, that we really should not be using as much JavaScript in the interfaces that we used. And I really do want to be specific about the word interface. This also is not a throwaway word that is just anybody's definition. Interface is a specific artifact that as a developer, I have to deliver to my customers. And I want to be able to tell my customers that this tool is accessible and I'm not blowing smoke, pardon my French, up their ass, right? Because there are auditing tools that allow for us to audit the accessibility of our websites as much as the applications that we build. And I very much depend on assistive technologies myself. So it isn't so much just something where, I'm offering accessibility to my customers, but, even as I get older, my vision is getting worse. Even as I get older, I depend more and more on assistive technologies. And so really the wider question here is, while it might seem really cool, whatever it is that ChatGPT does, the really core question, I think, is one that comes back to what the inventor of the web has always been attempting to sort of, found a paradigm around, which is interoperability. And I think that's the big question is, and I think that's a big question in the discussions that transhumanists have, which is interoperability and integration of the disciplines across all the sciences. And I think that a lot of people really just not so much just search problems, but they're the problem of sort of how do we expand our reach? How do we expand the scope of discoverability? And I think that this might also be something that's of interest to educators as well.
Yeah, I think ChatGPT definitely falls into that category. I think I said earlier that we probably haven't come across something in humanity before that has the ability to understand, at least somewhat understand, almost all the information we have on almost all the things and draw links between those things. I don't think we've seen that power of that come out yet, at least in common examples of how this technology is being used, but I think it's there. And that ability, that interoperability of information, I guess if you kind of boil it down to that, is something that this tool could definitely help with. I've got to jump though, team. It's been great having a chat with you, and look forward to the next spaces we have. So thanks for your time and for your questions.
Thanks, Aaron.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. I've got to go as well.
David, Aaron, pleasure, guys.
Sounds like the conversation might be coming to an end. So can I just get some hearts up in here for our speakers for giving up their time today? We really appreciate you guys bringing all of your free thought and transparency to these sorts of conversations. It goes a long way in helping keep the conversation alive. I think it's a very, very important conversation, and certainly this won't be our last space on the topic. I'm just going to throw to the speakers now who are left in the room if they've got anything else, any final closing thoughts before we wind this space up. David, before we leave? Nope. Okay, Alex?
Yeah, my final word is I attack the AI world from the perspective of an entrepreneur. So if anyone is interested in learning more about how I'm using ChatGPT and all these other applications, always feel free to reach out on DM, or I share my thoughts as they come to me. So I think there's a lot that can be discovered and enhanced. We're going to see a lot of one-person businesses emerge. So I want to be a catalyst for making that change. So yeah, happy to help anyone that needs it.
Amazing. And thanks for giving up your time, Alex. I'm sure you've picked up a bunch of people who are now following you and are probably going to reach out and start asking you questions, mate. Arlo, you've been pretty quiet this space. Did you have any final thoughts?
No, I just want to say thanks for putting it together, and thanks for putting together such an interesting panel. It was really thought-provoking. Could you hear me?
I can hear you.
I can hear you.
Okay. I can't hear Arlo, so I'll leave it to you, Mo.
Arlo was just saying that it's incredibly thought-provoking and he really enjoyed the space. So thanks again, Arlo, for joining us. And I'll sign off by saying, anytime I learn as much as what I have just now, I need to wash it down with a strong drink and just take it all in. So that's what I'm going to be doing. So thanks for having me on the show, guys.
Yeah, always a pleasure, Mo, and welcome to the team. Our regular audience members will get used to seeing you around, and thank you everybody in the audience for giving up your time it is a very, very important conversation, and it's been a great spaces. I'll probably have to go back and listen to it again at least once more to try and understand a lot of what was spoken about. But all in all, a great space. Thanks, everybody. And I have already pinned up a couple of tweets to the top. There is a live stream event happening right now. Jessie, our beloved Jessie, is throwing a live stream of a party she's running in Dallas. So there's the link up there if you want to go and join that stream and have some fun. And way back early on, I also pinned next week's Town Square for you all to set your reminders and come and join us next week. And until then, thank you very much and goodbye, everybody.
Thanks very much for watching. If you enjoyed this content, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and maybe consider watching one of my other videos. Bunnies up!